Hi everyone, this is my great pleasure to invite Dr. Koenraad Elst again back to Talks on Ground. He's been so kind to come online a couple of times earlier discussing Hindutva and also the Aryan Invasion Theory. So, welcome, Dr. Elst. By the way, Dr. Elst has written many books. He has authored Why I Killed the Mahatma, Uncovering Decolonizing the Hindu Mind, Still No Trace of an Aryan Invasion, Negationism in India, Concealing. Uh, I'm not reading out the full thing. The Saffron Swastika, Who is a Hindu, and many more. So he's a real scholar when it comes to Hindutva, India's past. And today we are going to talk about Rakhigarhi, which is something we just touched upon it in our last podcast, I think in January, February, but we couldn't
Mhm.
go into any detail. So, welcome back, Dr. Elst, and would love to hear more from you about this. And I believe you've been going to those excavations regularly. So, what have you found?
I mean, there were excavations there, really nothing to see. Then Rakhigarhi, which is one of the oldest and the biggest Harappan site. That's not very eventful. There's a little museum with the findings that is certainly worth seeing. The excavations are, of course, worth seeing in the sense that you can hardly talk about Harappan research without ever having seen anything of this kind. But so it's not designed for tourists or anything. It's just people working, and so that is absolutely necessary for the archaeological findings, but it's not really very exciting. I mean, it is not tourist advice to go there. But so yeah, I mean, it's it's uh, it's testimony to an absolutely unique historical achievement of India.
Right. So, what I
That
hear,
it
they
still
found
is.
right, and I mean, I just read about this that they found a woman's body 4,600 years old. They did some DNA testing,
Yes.
and they found that there was a Iranian lineage, a Iranian lineage, but there was nothing that suggested any European DNA, and a lot of the stuff that has been found
Of
kind of.
course, but that's yeah. Yeah, of course that has been found, but you see, mostly in India, they draw the wrong conclusions. You see, the Aryan invasion, if ever there was such a thing, is usually dated about 1500 or 1800 BCE, which is after the time that this woman lived. So obviously, she does not have the genes of the invaders. So the fact that she doesn't have Central Asian genes doesn't prove that there cannot have been invasions at a later date. And so, of course, the Aryan invasion theory itself predicts that there won't be any Central Asian or European genes in people living before this invasion. So you see somebody has to do that. Of course, these genes have to be analyzed. Nevertheless, they don't have the evidential value that is ascribed to it or to
Right.
them.
So at least one thing is there that these excavations have proven the sophistication or whatever was there at least 4,600 years
Yes.
ago, and that kind of uh, integrates with a lot of the let's say the myths that a lot of the Hindutva people have been propagating, at times wrongly so, but at the same time there is some grain of truth when we talk about a 5,000-year-old civilization, if not longer.
Oh, yeah, 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 of course. About that, there is no doubt. But you see, what is worth comment here is the fact that you bring in the word Hindutva. Um,
Right.
First of all, as for myself, I strongly criticize the term Hindutva. I think it's a rather infelicitous combination of a Persian word and a Sanskrit suffix. So it was not invented, it was not coined by Savarkar, but it was launched as a political term by Savarkar. And so effectively it means Hindu nationalism. Now, strictly, etymologically, it means Hinduness, the fact of being Hindu. And that's what it originally was meant as. There's some Bengali fellow, some, I don't know, Bhattacharya or something, who started using it in the 1880s. And then in 1923, 24, it is Savarkar who launched it as a political term in his manifesto called Hindutva. But so that whether that word is correct, that's another discussion. Note that very many people in the political Hindu movement use the word Hindutva not in its political sense, but use it as a synonym for Hinduism. And so they justify it saying, yeah, but ism means dogmatism, is a Western ideological term, and it doesn't apply to what we mean by we Hindus. So we call it Hindutva. Now that's understandable, but that's totally unrealistic. The word Hindutva already has a meaning, and it's not Hinduism. And indeed, in his booklet, Savarkar himself makes it a point, makes it a very explicit that Hindutva and Hinduism are not synonyms. So, yet, you see, they are being used as synonyms by a lot of the insiders. And 2 years ago, there was a Hindu conference taking place in Bangkok. I was there. And so there they passed a resolution saying that henceforth the term Hinduism should be replaced with Hindutva. Now, that's a very bad idea. That's only going to increase the confusion. Anyway, the point here is that you use the term Hindutva when you talk about different hypotheses concerning the homeland of the so-called Aryans, concerning yes or no the Aryan invasion or the out of India scenario. Now, it is, sorry to say, but it is insulting to use an ideological term for that. You see, when I am speaking about people in the other camp or people in our own camp or anywhere who hold one or another scientific hypothesis, I do not describe them through their political allegiance. Like, for example, the step homeland theory, was floating in the air a bit in the 19th century, along with several other homelands. And so the one who really uh, fixed this South Russian homeland scenario is a fellow called Gordon Childee, an Australian archaeologist in the 1920s. Now, he was a Stalinist. And so, because ideologically, his ideal was being realized in the Soviet Union, he was a bit prejudiced in favor of Soviet territory as the homeland. So you see, some people said, no, it is in Denmark, no, it is in Turkey, no, it is in Armenia, no, it is in India. So there were a number of theories, but he, in his heart, he preferred it to be in the Soviet Union. And so that's where he ended up with his theory. Now, still, I have read that name Gordon Chiley many times in books on European history. And yet, it's only a few weeks ago that I discovered that this man was a very committed Stalinist. In 1956, when Khrushchev, the successor of Stalin, gave a speech revealing all the crimes that Stalin had committed. And so then Stalin fell into disfavor even among communists. Gordon Chiley committed suicide. His world collapsed. He was a very committed Stalinist. Now, I have never heard the, uh, the South Russian Homeland theory described as Stalinist. It's only the
Hmm.
out of India theory that is described as Hindu nationalist. You see, that is really an insult. People, top scholars like Michael Witzel, like Hans Heinrich Hoppe, and so on, have done this many times, described us as Hindu nationalists. Now, you see, this is not only insulting, it also happens to be untrue. You see, first of all, the Indian homeland theory, yeah, the out of India theory, though it didn't have that name yet, was started around 1770. Um, and the first person who really gave it publicity, made it a common idea, was the French freethinker Voltaire. So you see, he was one of the first to read a paper written by a Jesuit missionary working in India, Gaston Laurent Coeurdoux, in which he showed that Sanskrit was related to Greek and to Latin. And so from then on, you see, you get more detailed theories. But so that basic idea of an Indo-European language family, that then became common. Now, at the time, the first scholars who explained this all believed in India as the homeland. The, the Indian homeland theory is the invention of Europeans, and partly of Europeans staying in India, because unlike Europeans staying in Europe, for whom India was a far distant and unimportant, country, uh, they understood, how big and how important India is. So it's typically people staying in India, but having the European concern with this whole language family stuff, which Indians from their tradition didn't have, um, it's those people who start developing this Indo-European theory. And so, for the first 50 or so years, the out of India theory was unquestioned. The only rival it had at the time, to some little extent, was the Armenian homeland theory. And so this is because of the Bible. You see, Bible thumpers, they knew enough that the current humanity starts not with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, because they all died out in the flood, except for one family, Noah and his wife and his three sons and his three daughters-in-law. They survived thanks to that ship, the Ark, and so that landed in Armenia. And so from Armenia, they repopulated the world. Now, the three sons were Sem, the father of the, let's say, roughly the Middle Easterners, then Ham, the ancestor of the Africans, and Japheth. And so he is deemed the ancestor of the Indo-Europeans. So from Armenia, he spread the Indo-European languages to Europe as well as to India. Okay? So, but that was, even though most people still were Christians in those days, nevertheless, that theory did not catch on very much. So the dominant theory was definitely the Indian Homeland theory. But then progressive, theories and so on followed. And in the 1830s, 1840, let's say, there is a shift. And then a non-Indian homeland becomes dominant. Then you have, of course, a choice between several options. And so there are a number of competing homelands, but not India. And then gradually it is the South Russian, Volga River, Don River, the area where right now the war between Russia and Ukraine is happening. That area was then favored. So from the 1920s onwards, that's absolutely uncontested. It's only recently that other homelands in that vicinity have gained some following, either in Anatolia or in Armenia, northern Iran. But so, but so, all this formation of theories is the work of non-Indians. So the revival of the out of India theory, which had gone out of favor around 1840, that comes back in 1982 with a paper by an American archaeologist, Jim Sheffer, who was neither a Hindu nor a nationalist, okay, where he shows that in archaeology, there is simply no evidence for an Aryan invasion or an Aryan immigration, as they now squeamishly call it, into India. Then this is followed up by several other archaeologists, initially all non Indian and non Hindu. At the same time, in India, there is a study of the history and a comparison somewhat with the Harappan findings by K.D. Setana, who was also not a Hindu, he was a Parsi. And so from then on, you see the Indian homeland theory comes back in the race, but it's all very hazy. Nobody knows yet what it is if it is not the Aryan invasion. And that transition phase lasts till 2000, when Srikanth Talageri comes out with his book, The Rig Veda, A Historical Analysis, which gives a very coherent and credible scenario for a start from India onwards. He is a real Hindu nationalist. He says so. And so many others involved were not even Hindu, were certainly not nationalist. And even among the Indians and among the Hindus, you see, there are also a number who would not ever call themselves Hindu nationalists. And those who do, like Talageri, have given their evidence, and that evidence is simply objective, you see, it's simply from the historical or the literary record. There's nothing Hindu nationalist about that. That evidence is what it is. And people from any ideology can recognize that evidence for what it is. So here again, labeling scholars by their supposed or sometimes their real political ideology is simply inappropriate.
Right. So, if I called it Dharma protectors, I mean, I don't know what's the right word. Dharmaism. But then it's not a ism at all.
Oh,
Uh,
okay. Yeah, right.
uh, so something like that. Will it then be able to describe correctly the civilizational resurgence, if I may, even
Yeah.
if not in the right direction all the time?
Okay. Well, you see, the unique thing about Hinduism, that which is it is sought after worldwide, a Hindu element that everybody tries to adopt is yoga. And so, yoga or similar things like Buddhism comes
Right.
essentially from the same cradle. And so they are methods for moksha or nirvana, or what
Right.
some Western Orientalists have called the zero experience.
Right.
The emptying of the mind. So that is not Dharma, that is moksha. That's another dimension, another goal of human life. And that is perhaps the most specifically Indian. And it's not entirely non-existent in China, for example, but largely you see it is a very Indian heritage. Dharma is something else. And so, to a large extent, that's universal. That's something you find everywhere. You see, everywhere, society is going to be ordered to some extent, because if you let anyone do anything and anything goes, your society is not going to, you know, last very long. And so you have the mos maiorum, what the Romans called, the customs of the ancestors, which were not revealed or anything. Like Moses did his big show on Mount Sinai, pretending that God had revealed two things on two stone tables, namely a new theology with monotheism, the fact that you can only worship the one jealous God, no others. And secondly, aniconism, the fact that you cannot depict God, not the false gods and not the true God either. Okay, so that's a new theology. That's what Moses was concerned with. But you see, to make it more respectable and acceptable, he embedded it in a morality, the one that's given on the second table, thou shalt not kill, you know, um, and for that, there was no revelation needed because everybody knew that morality. That was age old. Their grandfathers also lived by principles like thou shalt not kill, and so that is universal. Every society has something like that. Like, for example, you see, Christians like to say, oh, the fellow feeling, the sensitivity for others' happiness and so on, that's typically Christian. Well, no, that's not Christian. Before I go into what Hinduism says, in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which is clearly very pre Christian, it is already said, you see, when you die, when you overlook your life, when you have something like a last judgment, you have to wonder, how well have I lived? And so one criterion that is given is, have I made no one cry? You see, have I
Hmm.
not provoked any unhappiness in people? And so that's not something typically Christian, the notion of charity. Charity existed in many other places. Also in India,
So there.
already in the Upanishads or even earlier, you have this notion of daya, of fellow feeling, of compassion. And, you have, you have lists of virtues, like in the Manu Smriti, you have a list of 10 virtues. The Buddha has the Panchashila, the five precepts, namely, I might as well give them non-violence, truthfulness, non-stealing, chastity, and non-intoxication. And so that's a good thing to live by. I mention them because there are very few things in life that I have ever committed myself to, but I have myself, sworn loyalty to these Panchashila. Um, and so, this is a very healthy and normal thing. It's Buddhism is not specifically great because of these five commandments, because they are not that unique, you see. Buddhism is special because of the meditation it teaches. But nevertheless, it is a good thing that it teaches these values, that you can apply in social life. So you see, that's a good thing that Hinduism has brought or has taught. I don't say it has brought because essentially it goes back very far. But so it teaches that without any attached theology. Moses teaches, thou shalt not kill, but at the same time teaches monotheism and aniconism. And so Dharma doesn't do that. You see, for Dharma, you see, whatever you believe, whatever your relation with the divine, whether you're an atheist or a polytheist or a monotheist or so, you have to stand by these social values. And so Dharma is open ended. But it is very specific in terms of the social virtues that you have to practice. So that's dharma. I mean, so dharma, unlike moksha is not interested in others. It's interested in consciousness. It's interested in interiorization, meditation. Dharma is your relation with others, both your fellow men as well as your fellow animals and all other beings, and also the beings up there, your ancestors, deceased but still somewhere present in your consciousness, and the gods, whatever they are, however you define them. And so, Dharma, in a sense, is both ethics, relation with others, and religion in the sense of the proper relation with the gods. And so, ancient people had a very specific understanding of this, like you were supposed to bring that kind of sacrifice to the god under that particular stellar configuration. Um, and so, you had to do your duties towards the divine. What those duties were, of course, evolved. But I mean, Dharma essentially says that there are norms, there are things you have to do, there are things you have to abide by. It's not true that anything goes. So the opposite of dharma is adharma, which means the fact that anything goes. Like when Duryodhana wants to disrobe Draupadi, you see, he is smugly, self-righteously exercising that which he can do, which nobody can stop him from. So
Right.
that's adharma. The fact that you do not feel yourself constrained by norms, the fact that anything goes, that's adharma. Dharma, by contrast, is living by certain norms.
Right. So I completely agree with that. So if I was to continue my inquiry into this,
And
what if the what is unfolding is like a rediscovery of Bharat?
yes.
Will that be a appropriate term?
Well, I don't know if a rediscovery is going on. You see, the circles I hang out with, I mean, there are 1.4 billion Indians, and I don't know all of them. So, you see, my knowledge of India is very select. But so the people I hang out with, they are busy with this rediscovery. And in those circles, you have this thing of uh, I- Indian knowledge systems. You see the rediscovery of all the Indian contributions to science and other disciplines. So that's very useful. Somebody has to do that, but I am not in a position to say, oh, this is the new trend. You see, this is where it's going. I don't know. Some people are working on this, but how representative they are, you see, I am not sure, because you could also say, no, you see, Americanization is going on, full pace, uh, more and more. native Indians, at least especially Hindus, are becoming ever more forgetful of their tradition. And so this rediscovery, these Indian knowledge systems, that's a rearguard action of people who try to prevent the inevitable, namely the disappearance of Hindu heritage. Some people make that analysis. And I mean, you see, that's an occupational hazard of being a historian. I am very much busy with the distant past and very little with present day trends. So I am not too well informed about where this is going.
Well, I do see a lot of when it comes to food, when it comes to rituals, some customs, festivals, even attire at times, a little more, slightly more inward looking generation is coming about, a little more confident. But at the same time, they are also exposed to some very serious Americanized things like Netflix and
Mhm.
social
Yeah.
media and fast food and so on, which even 20 25 years back was, both these trends were not there. So I hear you. So I agree there's a defensive thing going on from the
But it's a
yes.
bit more subtle than that. You see, some modernization trends also work in favor of Hinduism. And so this is
Mm.
especially, you mentioned Netflix, this
Yeah.
whole blogosphere, and then now the YouTubosphere, or how do you call it? The podcasts and so on. They strongly
Right.
work in favor of Hinduism. You see, from Nehru onwards, uh, fortunately, not too many Hindus read books, but what you found of literature, and especially of school books, was
Mm.
calculated to weaken Hinduism and to weaken the attachment of upgrowing Hindus to Hinduism. And so that is changing. And there is an enormous democratization going on of the spread of information. So now you see everybody can, post his message to YouTube, and people are far more likely to look for, an hour and a half to some video than to actually go to the bookshop and get books and read them. And so, in that sense, you see a lot of Hindu rediscovery is reaching far more people than was possible 25 years ago.
Right, and I also see a certain generational uh,
But you see,
differences. Yeah,
I also see a little.
I also see
Sorry,
a
I didn't
generational.
get you.
I see some generational differences. So people who are maybe over 60 are very turning definitely very Bharatiya, if I may. Even if they lived all their life trying to be Western, uh, and the younger generation, especially the very young ones, are the teens. They are being brought into a world which is a little, as you said, there are some good things that some of these social media and other trends have happened. While the middle part is where I think there's still some confusion, where people born in the 90s, they were born into a slightly defensive culture, and now they're seeing a very different India, whether senior to them or younger to them.
Mhm.
So I see that is where I
Well,
think there is.
I have a very positive impression of these, this younger generation of scholars. I mean, you see, there are a number of people that I knew as beginning journalists, people who came to interview me or so, and And so now, like 20 years later, they have become, important scholars in their own right. And, their output is very good. And I mean, the feeling of being, dominated by the so-called eminent historians, the whole leftist trend. That doesn't play very much anymore. They have outgrown that. So in that sense, you see, intellectually, I do see progress, absolutely. But what I don't know is how far this is going to go. You see, is this really going to save Hinduism? I'm not sure. I mean, I can perfectly imagine a scenario where shortly before the end, Hinduism had a revival and then it ended. Like my grandfather, he died of cancer. It took some time. He declined. Then his last few days, he was fully alive again and full of plans. And you see, he was looking forward. And then he died. So perhaps you see something like that is happening with Hinduism. I hope not, but you know, I, I mean, being a historian, I know that there are strange turns in history, and so these are things that can happen.
Right, especially if politics and geopolitics was to turn negative, then yeah, I mean, things because of the social media and the development, the reversal of things can also happen at pace. So I hear what you're saying. Uh, one last thing. There's this integral humanism also, which
Yeah.
Dayal Upadhyay talked about. I haven't really read it, but I guess that also talks about a little bit about um, how RSS positions itself within the Indian society, within the Hindu society, uh, and I guess trying not to offend anybody, if I may.
Yeah. Well, there's a book that I just bought. I haven't read it yet, but I very much like the cover, namely a comparison between Jacques Maritain, a Frenchman who formulated a doctrine called integral humanism, Humanisme intégral, in the 1930s, and
Okay.
Deenayal Upadhyay, who formulated a doctrine called integral humanism in the 1960s. And
Oh.
so I mean, I know a few things about the comparison. I'm going to read interestedly what this writer makes of it. But so you should see that that term had a rather similar function. You see, in both Nehruvian India, the situation in which Deenayal Upadhyay had to work, and France of the 1930s, under the Third Republic, which was militantly secularist, you had the same depreciation of religion. And so um, Maritain, who was a Christian, tried to put up a defense against that. And so he said, yes, you see, humanism, which is a non religious worldview, humanism, we are all for it. However, a humanism that denies man's religious dimension is not an integral humanism. It denies, it ignores, it cold shoulders one essential aspect of human beings, which is their religious dimension. So, this integral humanism was a humanism, but open for religion. In that sense, it is a modern term of what ancient Hindus called Dharma. so, so it's a very nice term, and I'm all for it. Um, but you see, that is why, that's precisely why practically all books about, or all papers, everything being published about the Hindu movement is totally silent about integral humanism. You see, this is the official ideology of the RSS-BJP. Every new member is being trained, in that worldview. Yet they completely pretend it doesn't exist. It's like you write about the British Labour Party and don't mention socialism. You see, it's absurd, but in the treatment of Hindu nationalism, it is the done thing. And the reason is that integral humanism sounds too nice. You see, if you want to depict the Hindu movement as ugly, vicious fascists, then the term integral humanism isn't very helpful. Integral humanism, who can be against that? you know so to demonize the Hindu movement, you have to keep that term out of view. But so I think it's fine. However, there is a downside also, and it's not the contents of this ideology, but it is the fact that it never mentions the word Hindu. Indeed, as I said, it is a good modern replacement of what is essentially a synonym, namely Dharma. But
Right.
you see, that means that you are keeping the Hindu source out of view. And that, in fact, is what the RSS-BJP did it for. That's why they liked this idea so much. That's why they enshrined it as their official ideology. You see, everybody, all the publications about the BJP and so on says, oh, it's a fanatical Hindu movement. Like now about Modi, they say, yeah, you see, and now Modi is in power, and there has been so much discrimination against the non-Hindus and so on. That is total hallucination. There is absolutely nothing of the kind. There have been some
Right.
discrimination against Hindus. That's another story. But so, that image of a fanatical Hindu movement, that's at best anachronistic. You see, when Shyam Prasad Mukherjee founded the earlier incarnation of the BJP, which was called the Jan Sangh,
Understand.
1951,
Yeah.
he was a Hindu. He was a committed Hindu. Like he had, used his political influence to save West Bengal from inclusion in Pakistan. I mean, he was concerned with the real Hindu interests, with the Hindus in Kashmir. He died in jail in Kashmir, as you know. But so he was a committed Hindu, not a fanatical Hindu, but a committed, a dedicated Hindu. Yes. And so at that time, there were some Hindu points of interest in the party manifesto. Now, from 1955 or so, he died in 1953, you get a decline in the Hindu caliber of the Jan Sangh already. And so you have some real Hindus there, like Raghuveer, the one who coined all these new Hindi terms to replace English terms, to make
Mhm.
Hindi a modern language capable of handling the modern world. So
Right.
that was also a point of interest for the Hindu movement at the time. Then you have this Balraj Madhok, also a committed, maybe perhaps a fanatical Hindu, but he was thrown out of the party. And so then you get the dominance of Nanaji Deshmukh of Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who were not Hindu minded at all. I interviewed Nana Deshmukh in the 90s when I was preparing a PhD about this topic. And so he already gave you all the secularist talk that we now hear under Modi, like the word development. You see, when Modi came to power, he said, no, 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 this is not a Hindu party. No, no, we are only committed to vikas, to development. You see? This is like Indira Gandhi speaking. Garibi Hatao and so on. You see, no ideology, all we need is, something social, something nice, development. Okay. So there was nothing Hindu activism about him. Then Vajpayee was an imitator of Nehru, even in rhetorical style and so on, but especially in ideology. There was no Hindu fanaticism there at all. Then what happened? So they merged into the Janata Dal, or the Janata Party. Then they reconstituted themselves in 1980 as the BJP. Then already most of the explicitly Hindu things were phased out, like Hindu Rashtra. There are still now books appearing that say, oh, the BJP is committed to Hindu Rashtra. From 1980 onwards, at least, there is no Hindu Rashtra in their manifesto anymore. And they themselves emphasize it. You see, when you ask them about this, they will say, no, it's not there. Come on, go find it. It's not there. And so they became a secular party. And then they found that that doesn't catch on with the voters. So they had 4 seats in 1984, only 2 seats.
Two.
The next, no, in 1980 they had 4 seats. In 84 they had 2 seats. Okay, so they were busy disappearing. Then, fortunately for them, others, not themselves, others, Congress politicians, and the last MP of the Hindu Mahasabha, Mahanta Vaidyanath, the personal guru of Yogi Adityanath, the
Yogi
present chief
Adityanath.
minister, right? They started this Ayodhya movement for the
Mm.
liberation of the birthplace of Rama. And
Right.
so then the BJP sort of captured this movement, made it its own, and then in 1989 they won 86 seats. So, in spite of all the predictions by Vajpayee that you see this Hindu plank is no longer appealing to people and so on, it was proven on the contrary that this Hindu theme was very popular. So they won 86 seats, and in the next election, 91, they won 120 seats. And then they judged that they had milked the Ayodhya issue enough. And then they, left it like a hot potato. And then they didn't do anything about it anymore. You see, these days you have all these, BJP agents saying, "Oh, it is thanks to the BJP that the Ram Temple was built." After all, that's not
Mm.
true. You see, the BJP discarded the issue, especially after the demolition, after having tried to stop the Kar Sevaks from demolishing the Babri Masjid. You know, I mean, the press said, "Oh, Advani is guilty of the demolition." That's not true at all. He started crying when he saw the demolition happening. And you see, from that time onwards, the BJP didn't do anything about Ayodhya. Fortunately, the Ayodhya matter was sub judice. It was wending its way very slowly through the courts. And so then the Uttar Pradesh High Court took it up seriously, started looking into the evidence, the historical evidence for the temple, then to make it, you see, the documents and so on, that's all very nice. That's the stuff that I work on. But, that has little appeal, that doesn't mean much to people. But then they ordered excavations of the site in 2003. And then the foundations of the temple were found, of a very big temple, moreover. And you see, that, of course, is clear. That is something you can't deny. And so, on the basis of that evidence, they gave a verdict handing the site to the Hindus. And so then that was in 2010. And then in 2019, it took them 9 years, the Supreme Court finally confirmed that verdict. Now, that verdict in 2010 took place when neither at the center nor in Uttar Pradesh the BJP was in power. So the BJP had nothing to do with it. It is simply the evidence that convinced the judges. You see, we can't go diametrically against the historical evidence. And so that's why it was given to Hindus and not 100% to Hindus. You see, they also ordered some other side to be given to the Muslims for a mosque, which, evoked in some Hindus the cynical reaction, oh, you see, if I steal something, and the judge says, yeah, you have to give it back, but we will give you something else instead. Is that going to be judicial practice? Because that's what is being done here. Well, anyway, I mean, I don't think the issue is that important. If this satisfies the Muslims, well, maybe leave it like that. If at least Hindus have their temple, you see, because after making that much of it, they shouldn't have accepted the defeat. But on the other hand, to answer a question you haven't asked yet, but is certainly going to come, um, I do not think that therefore now Hindus have to demand all temples. Sitaram Goel, the historian, in 1990 had published this list of almost 2,000 mosques built on the site of or with the materials of Hindu temples that had been demolished by Islamic iconoclasts. And so these 2,000 or so, and there are many more in the field, should these all be reclaimed by Hindus? I have, I mean, in principle, I'd say, well, yeah, maybe, yeah, but in practice, you see, it's causing a lot of trouble, and it's not worth it because not because temples aren't important, but because what is even more worth is the, let me say in religious terms, the souls of all the Hindus who have been either really forcibly or at least under social pressure converted to Islam. Most of the Indian Muslims today are descendants of native converts. There have been some Arab and Turkic invaders whose genes are also still present in the Muslim community, but mostly they are descendants of Hindus. Okay, so
Right.
the right thing to do, on principle, and it's most practical, though it's still a formidable task, is to bring these people back. And then later on, it is they who will bring their mosques back. So I
Hmm.
don't think that that is a correct goal for Hindus to set themselves. It's wrongly spent energy.
I agree, and I think even more than, I mean, now that you've got Ayodhya, you've got the Ram Temple, and you've got some movement on other cases. I think there are other pressing issues, and as you mentioned, that we really don't know if this is like that last flicker of the flame, or is this a real reigniting of the of Bharatvarsh. So we'll have to see. Maybe that's what we talk about the next time around. But in very short, can you tell us what do you think? Is this a full revival, or is this that flicker of the flame before it dies out?
Well, I mean, I see an intellectual revival. That's what I'm most in touch with. And so that is very much there. Like, we just talked about Ayodhya. Today, no eminent historian is going to dare to deny that there have been temple demolitions by Muslim invaders. This is so
Right.
obvious, everybody knows it. It's no use denying it anymore. And indeed, the
Right.
surviving, eminent historians are looking the other way, are, raising other themes if they prefer not to talk about Ayodhya anymore. So in that sense, you see, Hindus are scoring. a few victories in the debate. But
Hmm.
whether that means a victory in real life, I'm not sure. You see, I mean, I see many non Hindu habits in everyday life uh, coming to the fore. For instance, very typical. Um, the the Hindu greeting, Namaste. Okay,
Hmm.
in 2020, when COVID started, both Prince Charles, now King Charles, and President Trump praised Hindus for having a form of greeting that doesn't spread germs.
Right.
Right? So it was at the time deemed unhygienic to shake hands.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I see before me, you see Trump saying, "Oh yeah, in India they know an alternative." So people were not shaking hands. I was already used to it myself because earlier I'd had an operation and so on, and I was very, very vulnerable for anything contagious. So I was instructed by the doctors not to shake hands. And so for me, the alternative was obvious. It's what I had learned in India.
Right.
So you would have thought in 2020 that now finally mankind as a whole is ready for adopting the Namaste greeting. But
Hmm.
I am afraid that exactly the opposite has happened. Today in India, I meet very few people who do namaste, or sometimes they do namaste and then still they hold out their hand for a handshake. But so the handshake is now all over the place. I don't know if that is progress. Um, Right. But
Yeah.
so, I mean,
There is.
it's an example of how all these non Hindu influences are, penetrating on all sides. And so I'm not sure that Hinduism is strong enough to survive all that.
So on that note, I will do namaste to make sure. Uh, in fact, I am myself guilty of doing what you just mentioned. But I have changed greeting to people as namaste. But some of my friends, they kind of don't know how to respond when they hear that. Um, which is really funny. But maybe we discuss this more in detail when you're back in August. Um, so thank you so
Yeah,
much. I
yeah.
know you.
We can
Uh,
continue the conversation, of course.
right. Um, so thank you very much, Dr. Elst, for joining today, and we'll continue our discussion later. This was Dr. Elst on many different topics of Hindutva, Rakhigarhi, where is this heading, this Bharat revival. So we will come back with Dr. Elst at a later time. Thank you for watching. This was Samit from Talks on Ground.